Mad game. And this is, in my opinion, one of the craziest things I have ever seen in sports. This is like, people, I don't think, are going to talk enough about this. But like, this is, in my opinion, one of the craziest things I have ever seen in sports. ESPN, and I understand that ESPN aren't what they used to be when it comes to sports, but like, I've never seen anything like this before. ESPN, during the game, posted full reaction. Full reaction, Lynx dominate Fever. They literally did that. They said Lynx dominate Fever to win the Commissioner's Cup. They titled that during the game. Like, can we be honest here? Like, that might be one of the craziest things I've ever seen in sports. Like, I'm flabbergasted. I don't even know how to describe it.
ESPN just did the unthinkable. In the middle of the WNBA Commissioner's Cup final, with minutes left on the clock, the network hit publish on a headline that shook the internet. Lynx dominate Fever to win Commissioner's Cup. The only problem, the game wasn't over, and the Indiana Fever were about to pull off a stunning comeback that nobody saw coming. While Caitlin Clark and her squad were fighting tooth and nail on the court, ESPN was already writing the ending. It was more than a simple mistake. It was a public meltdown by a sports giant that's already under fire for its perceived bias, political slant, and disconnect from the fans. For critics, this was proof that ESPN is more interested in narratives than the actual game. And for fans of the Fever, it was the ultimate insult being counted out before the fight was even done. ESPN tried to fix the headline quietly, but the screenshots were already viral. The backlash hit hard. What should have been a night of celebration turned into a media disaster. But the story doesn't end there, because the way the Fever responded, it wasn't just revenge, it was history.
ESPN posted on their own platform. But can we just talk about how nuts this is? Like, I've never seen something like this before. And ESPN obviously have changed the title, but they literally posted that the Fever lost the game. And by the way, man, I didn't think the Fever had a chance. And let's be real.
It was supposed to be a high-stakes showdown, but ESPN decided the game was over long before the final whistle. Midway through the WNBA Commissioner's Cup final, ESPN posted a headline declaring the Minnesota Lynx had already dominated the Indiana Fever to secure the championship. They didn't say the Lynx were winning. They didn't say it was close. They said it was over, and the wording wasn't subtle. The headline read like a final score recap, as if the dust had settled and the Lynx were already holding the trophy. But they weren't, because the game was still happening. This wasn't just a blunder. It was a full-on broadcast disaster. For a network with the resources of ESPN, there's no excuse for prematurely calling a championship match. Especially in a game where momentum was shifting and Caitlin Clark was still on the court. Sports are unpredictable for a reason. That's why fans watch. And ESPN robbed viewers of that suspense. It felt like they were trying to write the ending to a movie before the climax even hit. What made it worse was the timing, with Caitlin Clark dominating headlines this season and a growing fan base tuning in specifically to watch her. ESPN's mistake looked personal. Was this carelessness? Or was this part of a bigger trend of dismissing the Fever as irrelevant despite their rise in viewership and cultural impact? The screenshot of the headline started spreading like wildfire on social media. Fans were stunned. How could the biggest name in sports journalism mess this up so badly? And why did it happen when the most talked about player in the league was on the floor trying to pull off a comeback? By the time ESPN quietly changed the title, the damage was done. Trust had already been shattered. The network looked out of touch, arrogant, and desperate to control a narrative that no longer fit reality. What should have been a night of triumph for the WNBA turned into a case study in media failure. But this wasn't just about ESPN's mistake. It was about who they underestimated. Because while they were writing off the Fever, Something remarkable was happening on the court, and what unfolded next would silence every doubter in the building.
I'm just going to say, did you think the Fever had a chance? And my answer is no. My answer is no. So we're going to start the poll here. We got 2,500 people in here right now, and I want to see how many. And we got to be honest. We've got to be honest. I don't think anyone in the WNBA thought the Fever had a chance. I don't think the Lynx thought the Fever had a chance. And I think that's a big reason why the Fever won the game. I don't think the Lynx thought the Fever had a chance.
The Indiana Fever walked into the Commissioner's Cup final with a shadow hanging over them. Nearly every analyst, commentator, and fan had already written them off. The odds were brutal. The narrative was clear. The Fever were supposed to get crushed. Even some of their own supporters quietly braced for disappointment. After all, they were up against a Minnesota Lynx team with experience, chemistry, and a roster built to dominate. But that's what made what happened next so stunning. Because the Fever didn't just show up, they showed out. From the opening minutes, it was obvious something was different. Indiana didn't play scared. They played like a team with something to prove. Every possession was a battle. Every loose ball was a war. They didn't care about predictions. They didn't care that ESPN had already crowned their opponent. They were locked in, focused, and aggressive. Caitlin Clark was orchestrating the offense with poise far beyond her years, making smart decisions and pushing the tempo. But it wasn't just her. The entire roster bought in. Players who had been doubted all season started stepping up in ways nobody expected, and that's the part ESPN didn't count on. While they were busy preparing a headline, the Fever were rewriting the story. Natasha Howard played with veteran fire, crashing the boards and dominating inside. The defense tightened. Turnovers turned into fast breaks. What had looked like a lopsided matchup was now a game, and then, shockingly, a momentum shift. What makes this even more humiliating for ESPN is that they weren't just wrong, they underestimated the only people who truly mattered. The 10 or 12 players wearing Fever jerseys didn't need approval. They didn't need media hype. All they needed was 40 minutes and a scoreboard. By the time fans online were dragging ESPN for their premature post, Indiana was taking control of the game in real time. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't scripted, but it was powerful. The Fever didn't just survive, they flipped the entire narrative. And with each basket, they weren't just proving the media wrong. They were reminding everyone why the game is played on the court, not in a newsroom. But the most poetic moment of the night hadn't even happened yet. That was still coming. If there was ever a moment where Caitlin Clark could have crumbled under pressure, this was it. A national spotlight, a championship on the line, and a media machine that had already written her team off. But instead of folding, she delivered. One of the most composed and commanding performances of her young career. Clark didn't scream. Didn't showboat, she simply took over the game with the calm of a seasoned veteran and the precision of a surgeon. From deep threes to laser-sharp assists, Caitlin Clark dismantled the Lynx defense, one possession at a time. Her court vision was surgical. She wasn't just scoring, she was orchestrating. Every cut, every screen, every pass was purposeful. She made the game slow down for everyone watching. And that's what made ESPN's mistake so much worse. Because while they were busy crafting a headline about the Lynx's imaginary victory, Clark was scripting one of the most iconic stretches of basketball we've seen from a rookie this season. There was a moment late in the game, a simple timeout, where the cameras caught Clark huddling with her teammates, not the coach. She wasn't just playing, she was leading. You could see the fire in her eyes, but also the clarity. She knew what needed to be done, and she rallied the team without saying a word to the media. That was the leadership ESPN ignored. That was the story they didn't anticipate. Critics have accused Clark of being overhyped. Too much attention, too many headlines. But this game, it proved the hype wasn't just noise, it was earned. She didn't beg for respect, she forced everyone to give it. Even the broadcasters, who had counted her out, had to reverse course live, scrambling to acknowledge what was unfolding in front of them. And let's not forget the irony. While ESPN was busy undermining Clark's chances, she was handing them one of the most embarrassing corrections in their recent memory. Because no matter how many headlines you type, the scoreboard doesn't lie. By the time the final buzzer sounded, Clark hadn't just led a team to victory, she'd delivered a statement to the entire league, the media, and every doubter watching at home. and the MVP. That was still to come. While all eyes were on Caitlin Clark, there was another player on the court who seemed destined to rise, Natasha Howard, a veteran with championship experience and a reputation for stepping up when it matters most. Howard didn't just show up in the Commissioner's Cup final. She owned it. And by the end of the night, she wasn't just a difference maker, she was the MVP. It wasn't flashy highlight reels or viral moments that defined her performance. It was toughness. It was poise. It was doing everything that doesn't always make the stat sheet, but wins championships. Rebounds in traffic, deflections that turned into steals. Points in the paint that came from pure grit. Howard played like someone who had been here before, and wanted to make sure no one forgot it. The wild part, Fever fans had been calling this in chats, in comment sections, in post-game threads. They said she was coming for that MVP moment, and that night, the prophecy came true. ESPN didn't mention it in their headline. They didn't factor it into their script, but Natasha Howard was the backbone of that comeback. While the media was caught flat-footed, she was locking down. The links in bringing calm to chaos, her performance was a reminder that experience still matters. That veteran leadership isn't just a cliche, it's a weapon. While Clark was setting the tempo, Howard was the anchor, the stabilizer, the player who knew when to slow it down, when to crash the boards, and when to trust her instincts. What stung for ESPN was that they never saw her coming. The story was supposed to be about the Lynx' domination. The Fever were just filler. And yet, there was Natasha Howard rewriting that script with every rebound and clutch basket. She didn't need hype. She didn't need validation. She just needed the moment, and she took it. When she was awarded MVP, it wasn't a surprise to the people who actually watched the game. It was a crowning moment that ESPN never prepared for. And by then, the humiliation was complete. But the ripple effect of this game didn't stop at the final buzzer. Because fans weren't just celebrating, they were furious. And what happened online next took the fallout to another level. The moment ESPN's headline hit the internet, it didn't take long for fans to notice, and they weren't having it. Within minutes, screenshots of the premature Lynx dominate Fever posts started making the rounds across Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, and sports forums. What was supposed to be a clean, professional broadcast moment had instantly turned into a meme. And ESPN, they were the punchline. Fans from all sides of the basketball world called them out, not just for the mistake, but for what it represented: arrogance, bias, and a clear lack of respect for the Fever. The backlash wasn't subtle. "Imagine posting the outcome before the game ends," one fan wrote. "This is why nobody trusts ESPN anymore," another replied. Some even joked that ESPN must have had the story written hours before tip-off, like they were more invested in a scripted narrative than actual sports. It wasn't just Fever fans who were upset. Even neutral fans and WNBA supporters, who had no stake in the outcome, were shaking their heads. And here's where it got worse for ESPN. Changed the headline without an explanation. It made the entire thing look even more suspicious. No apology, no accountability. Just a silent edit, as if no one would notice. But this is 2025. Screenshots are forever. The internet doesn't forget. What should have been a celebration of an incredible underdog story became a case study in media mistrust. The Fever didn't just win the Commissioner's Cup, they exposed how out of touch ESPN has become with the WNBA's new reality. Fans weren't going to let it slide. They demanded better. From hashtags dragging the network to viral breakdowns of the moment in real-time streams, the pressure mounted fast. This wasn't a minor headline blunder. It felt like a slap in the face to every viewer who believed in fairness, who believed in watching games for the drama and unpredictability, not for a predetermined outcome. And for Caitlin Clark and the Fever, it was bittersweet. Because even in victory, they had to fight for respect that should have come automatically. But the story didn't stop with fan outrage. Behind the scenes, people started asking bigger questions. And some of those questions turned the spotlight back on ESPN's entire approach to covering women's sports. For years now, ESPN has been accused of pushing more narrative than sports, whether it's politics bleeding into coverage or social commentary overshadowing actual gameplay. A growing portion of fans have been tuning out. They weren't turning away from sports, they were turning away from ESPN and this Commissioner's Cup fiasco. It gave critics all the ammunition they needed, Because nothing screams bias louder than announcing a champion who hasn't even won yet. The mistake wasn't just careless, it looked ideological. To many viewers, it felt like ESPN had a preferred storyline. The more established, marketable links win decisively, proving that the flashy Fever and their star rookie still have a long way to go. That narrative collapsed in real time, and the result was a complete broadcast humiliation. What was meant to be a simple game recap turned into the latest example of how ESPN's obsession with controlling the message is now backfiring. This isn't the first time fans have felt gaslit by coverage that doesn't reflect what's actually happening on the court, and when ESPN jumped the gun, it confirmed the worst fears of many, that outcomes don't matter as much as pre-written scripts. The Fever, led by a rookie and a veteran MVP, didn't fit the preferred narrative. So they were dismissed, underestimated, and overlooked. Until they couldn't be ignored anymore. What's more damaging for ESPN is that their critics are no longer just on the fringes. Casual fans, die-hard supporters, even sports writers, many of them joined in on the criticism. This wasn't about politics or culture wars. It was about accuracy, integrity, basic sports journalism, and ESPN failed on every front. What unfolded that night was a perfect storm. A team no one believed in, a superstar proving she belongs, a veteran reminding the league who she is, and a media empire collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. You couldn't script a better moment of reckoning. And while ESPN tried to move past it quietly, the clip of their mistake will live on in every future conversation about media credibility. The damage wasn't just to their reputation. It was to the trust fans used to have, but the real impact that was still unraveling in the locker rooms and post-game interviews. Inside the Indiana Fever locker room, the mood was electric, not just because they had pulled off a massive upset, but because they knew exactly what they had just done. These weren't just players celebrating a win, they were warriors who had just proven everyone wrong, and they knew it. The smiles were real, the energy was high, and the subtle jabs at the doubters. They were flying fast. Caitlin Clark, often composed in interviews, couldn't help but let a grin slip when asked about the early ESPN headline. She didn't need to say much. Her face said it all. The team knew about it. They saw it. And rather than let it rattle them, they used it as fuel. One player reportedly laughed. They wrote us off before the halftime buzzer even hit. Another said, let them write whatever they want. We'll write our own ending. Natasha Howard crowned MVP remained classy, but didn't hide the satisfaction. We came here to win, she said, not to fit into anybody's script. That line hit hard, especially for fans who had watched the narrative bend in every direction except the truth. The Fever weren't supposed to be champions, but there they were, dancing in the locker room, holding the trophy ESPN said they wouldn't. The coaching staff also chimed in with subtle shade. Head coach Christy Sides praised her team's mental toughness and focus, noting how nothing outside the court fazed them, not even a major network announcing their defeat before the final buzzer. It was clear the players had rallied around that moment, turning ESPN's blunder into a rallying cry, and while there was plenty of celebration, there was also reflection. The Fever weren't just playing for a trophy, they were playing for respect, for recognition, for every overlooked rookie, every underdog, and every team that's been dismissed because they didn't fit the polished media narrative. What happened in that locker room wasn't just celebration, it was vindication, the kind you earn with sweat, grit, and defiance. And while ESPN tried to erase their mistake, the Fever etched their response into the league's memory. But even as the champagne bottles popped, one question lingered. Would ESPN finally give them the respect they deserve? Or would the media spin begin all over again? What unfolded in the Commissioner's Cup final wasn't just a big win, it was a legacy moment. The kind of game that gets remembered years from now. Not just for the score or the stats, but for what it represented. The Indiana Fever didn't just beat the Minnesota Lynx. They broke a narrative. They exposed the arrogance of a media giant. And they announced in front of millions that they were no longer the league's overlooked footnote. They were contenders. And it happened in a way nobody saw coming. For Caitlin Clark, this was more than a breakout. It was the night she transformed, from a hyped rookie into a true floor general somewhat, who didn't just survive pressure, but thrived in it. Her poise, her vision, her refusal to flinch when the game tightened. That's what separates good players from legends. And the best part? She never had to say a word. Her play did all the talking. For Natasha Howard, it was a reminder that greatness doesn't fade. Her performance cemented her as one of the most reliable clutch players in the league, with another MVP award as proof. Together, she and Clark created a 1-2 punch that no headline could ignore, and for the Fever as a whole. This was the statement game, the kind that changes how the league sees them. No more underdogs, no more maybe next year. This was now. They didn't ride hype. They built chemistry, trusted each other, and fought for every inch. That's why the win felt so powerful. It was earned, not handed. Meanwhile, ESPN is left with the stain of their mistake. A premature headline that turned into a permanent embarrassment. No matter how quickly they edited it, the screenshots will keep circulating. It will follow them. Because it wasn't just about getting the outcome wrong, it was about underestimating the heart of a team that refused to quit. The Commissioner's Cup final was supposed to be routine, a safe broadcast, a predictable win. Instead, it turned into one of the most dramatic, humbling, and unforgettable games in recent WNBA history. And when the dust settled, only one truth remained. You don't get to write the ending before the final buzzer. Not in this league. Not anymore. ESPN wanted a clean storyline, a dominant Lynx win, a predictable broadcast, but what they got was a brutal reminder of why you never count a team out, especially not the Indiana Fever. Their premature headline didn't just backfire. It became a symbol of everything fans are tired of: scripted narratives, media bias, and the constant dismissal of underdogs. What the Fever delivered on that court wasn't just a win, it was a masterclass in grit, resilience, and timing. Caitlin Clark rose to the moment. Natasha Howard fulfilled the prophecy, and the rest of the squad backed it up with heart and hustle. This wasn't just a game, it was a turning point. For the Fever, it marked their arrival. For the league, it reshaped the conversation. And for ESPN, it exposed a growing credibility problem that can't be edited away. Fans aren't looking for stories to be written in advance. They want the drama to unfold naturally. The Fever gave them exactly that. And now, no one's forgetting it. Not the fans, not the league, and definitely not ESPN. Because this night wasn't just about a trophy, it was about proving that sometimes the biggest wins are the ones nobody saw coming, except the ones who earned it.